Now, as we mentioned, we are also learning more about why the president came back and spoke out again today, so soon after he addressed this issue, of course, just yesterday. A top administration source telling CNN his urgency almost purely a function of what the early investigation has turned up, how clear and how compelling that information was. This source also saying congressional briefings are set for tomorrow, and Mr. Obama didn't want details dribbling out in advance. So on now to the question of what next? Well, we're hearing it could be retaliation. Barbara Starr has been working her Pentagon sources. She is the first with the story. Barbara, what are you learning tonight?
Well, you know, Erica, we already know some facts. And first and foremost, there have been U.S.-backed military strikes in Yemen this past month. So what is next? Strikes against al-Qaeda? More of them to come. Senior U.S. officials tell CNN that the U.S. military and intelligence services, with their Yemeni counterparts, are now looking at fresh target lists. If they can make the link, if they can determine that there are al-Qaeda targets to strike directly related to the Northwest Airlines attack, they will assemble this target list. They will be ready to go if and when President Obama were to make the decision that he wants to engage in another round of strikes, Erica.
There's the question, too, in terms of those strikes as to how many people would be targeted. Do we know from intelligence agencies at this point, Barbara, how many al-Qaeda militants are either operating or training in Yemen right now?
There aren't really good numbers, but a senior official says the ballpark that they can come up with is that maybe there are now about 200 al-Qaeda operatives in Yemen, a hardcore at the center that's very well organized. They're looking to see how many of them they got in these airstrikes that happened earlier this month. But there are also training camps now in that country, and they are looking at the possibility that this Nigerian man may have trained at one of those al-Qaeda camps in Yemen, Erica.
There's also the issue, of course, of a general population in the country of Yemen that is not exactly supportive of the U.S. and its policies. That obviously is a sensitive issue in terms of the U.S. dropping bombs or helping to drop bombs potentially in the area. How do you deal with that and reconcile those sensitivities?
That has been the problem, as you point out, all the way along. Why has al-Qaeda been able over the years to gain such a stronghold in Yemen? Because yet the Yemeni government hasn't really gone after them. This summer, General David Petraeus and John Brennan, the head of President Obama's top counterterrorism advisor, both went to the Yemeni government, presented them with intelligence, and said, you have a serious problem. Your country is threatened by al-Qaeda. Since then, the president of Yemen has agreed. So they are working much more closely together. But the real secrecy here is that they are not acknowledging the depth of the U.S. military's involvement in the strikes that have already happened and any possible strikes to come. Erica?
Barbara Starr for us at tonight live in Washington. Barbara, thanks. We want to turn now to national security analyst Peter Bergen, who's joining us as well. When we look at these strikes that Barbara's talking about, Peter, obviously they have to be effective, essentially 100% effective, or for some of the reasons that Barbara just touched on, they could do more harm than good. So how do you go about making sure that they're actually going to work and hit the targets as intended?
Well, the two strikes that have already happened that Barbara referred to on December 17th and December 24th seem to have been quite effective. The situation is quite analogous to the situation that the United States is in Pakistan, where it is doing strikes with the essentially the agreement of the Pakistani government, but you know, has to sort of pretend that it's not involved, even though everybody knows that it is, because in both Pakistan and in Yemen, which are the two most important al-Qaeda bases at the moment, the population is quite anti-American. So this is just a fact of life. The Yemeni government has to balance the fact that it can't advertise its alliance with the United States too loudly with the fact that it needs money for, it's a very poor country to do many of its activities, and the fact that it too is to some degree threatened by al-Qaeda.
Mm-hmm. But there are also, I mean, you touch on that fine line, and we talked about it a little bit with Barbara, pretending that the U.S. isn't involved. But it's interesting, too, when you actually hear Yemeni government officials speak out. The foreign minister telling the BBC that really it's up to Western nations. They have this responsibility to monitor people, to let the Yemeni government know what's going on. But then you mentioned, of course, this sort of private deal that's going on with the United States. $67 million, I think, the U.S. has pledged. How do you reconcile those two to make it effective and to make it worthwhile for the U.S. and hopefully to make Yemen think it's worthwhile as well?
Well, Yemen is the poorest country in the Arabian Peninsula and is in desperate need of money. So that's one of the motivations here. But this is not a particularly new thing, by the way, Erica. I mean, there was a U.S. drone strike in Yemen in 2002 that took out some of the people involved in the USS Cole attack and actually killed an American citizen, Kamal Darwish, who happened to be in the car that was targeted. So it's not like this thing began just a few months ago. This has been going on for some period of time. Obviously, it's been amplified in the last several months, but there's been cooperation with the Yemenis and also frustrations with the Yemenis for quite a long time.
And a lot of practice for the U.S. government walking that fine line. Peter, stick around. We're going to come back to you just a little bit later in the program.